What if the king you worshipped hid a secret that could change everything? The hospital room in Memphis smelled of antiseptic and wilting roses, a sterile cocoon where time seemed to hold its breath. It was May 2025, and Nancy Harper lay in a bed that seemed too big for her frail frame, her once vibrant eyes dulled by the weight of 80 years. Her hands, gnarled from decades of work, clutched a thin blanket as if it could anchor her to this world a little longer. Beside her, Maggie Harper, her 35-year-old daughter, sat rigid, her journalist's notepad abandoned on the bedside table. This wasn't a story to be scribbled in ink. This was her mother's final moment, and it carried a weight Maggie couldn't yet name. "Maggie," Nancy whispered, her voice a fragile wisp, barely louder than the hum of the heart monitor. "There's something I never told you. About him. About Elvis." Maggie's breath caught. Elvis Presley. The name alone conjured 1,000 images. The swivel of hips that set the world ablaze, the voice that could melt hearts or break them, the legend who defined an era. Her mother had been a maid at Graceland in the 1960s, a quiet cog in the machine of the king's world, dusting his gold records, folding his shirts, tidying the jungle room's leopard print chaos. Maggie had grown up on stories of Graceland, but they were always light, nostalgic, Elvis sneaking peanut butter and banana sandwiches, or laughing with the staff over a late-night card game. This was different. Nancy's eyes held something heavy, a secret that had gnawed at her soul for decades. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Maggie leaned closer, her dark hair falling into her eyes. "What about Elvis?" Nancy's lips trembled, her gaze distant, as if she were seeing Graceland's white columns instead of the hospital's beige walls. "Find the box," she rasped, each word a labor. "In the attic at Graceland. It's the truth. About him. About me." Maggie's mind raced. A box? In Graceland's attic? The mansion was a museum now, its every corner polished for tourists. What could her mother have hidden there, and why was it surfacing now, at the end? "Mom, what box? What truth?" Nancy's eyes fluttered, a flicker of fear crossing her face. The heart monitor beeped faster, a warning that time was slipping away. Maggie gripped her mother's hand, her own fingers trembling. "Mom, please. Stay with me. Tell me." "I'm sorry, Maggie," Nancy whispered, her voice breaking. "I kept it, to protect him." The monitor flatlined. A piercing wail filled the room, and Maggie froze as nurses rushed in, their voices a blur of urgency. Hands pulled her back, but she couldn't tear her eyes from her mother's still form. Nancy Harper was gone, and with her, a secret that could rewrite the story of Elvis Presley. Maggie's chest tightened, grief and questions colliding. What had her mother hidden? And why had she carried it to her grave? Memphis, 1962. Nancy Harper was 22, her hands calloused from years of scrubbing floors in her family's cramped shotgun house on the wrong side of Beale Street. She stood at the gates of Graceland, her starched maid's uniform stiff against her skin, her heart pounding with a mix of nerves and awe. The mansion loomed before her, its white columns gleaming under the Tennessee sun, a palace of dreams for a girl who'd grown up with her father's whiskey bottles cluttering the porch and her mother's prayers echoing through thin walls. This job wasn't just work, it was a chance to escape, to touch a world bigger than her own. She'd landed the gig through Tommy Carter, her childhood friend who'd always smelled of motor oil and mischief. Tommy, with his crooked smile and grease-stained hands, had been fixing cars for the Presley entourage for a year. "Graceland's a different world, Nancy," he'd warned her the night before, leaning against his old Chevy. "Folks like us, we're just shadows to them. Don't get lost in it." But Nancy was already lost. She'd seen Elvis Presley on TV, his voice a velvet thunder that made her heart skip. Now, standing at the gates, she felt like she was stepping into a movie. The air smelled of magnolias and possibility, and when the gates swung open, she clutched her apron and stepped forward. Her first day was a blur of polished floors and whispered rules. Lila May, a fellow maid with a sharp tongue and a laugh that could light up a room, took Nancy under her wing. "Keep your head down, girl," Lila May said, scrubbing a chandelier in the dining room until it sparkled. "Elvis is kind, but fame makes folks complicated. You'll see." Nancy nodded, but her eyes wandered to the gold records lining the walls, the photos of Elvis shaking hands with presidents, crooning to screaming crowds. She dusted the piano where he'd played "Hound Dog" for friends, her fingers lingering on the keys, wondering what it felt like to live a life that big. The mansion hummed with life, staff bustling, phones ringing, the distant strum of a guitar. It was a world where dreams and pressure collided, and Nancy was just a speck in it. That night, as she tidied the study, she overheard Elvis on the phone, his voice low and strained. "I can't keep up, Colonel," he said, pacing in his blue suede shoes. "The movies, the tours, it's too much. I just want to sing, you know." Nancy froze, her dust rag forgotten. The king of rock and roll sounded human. Tired, like her father after a long shift at the factory, but heavier, like the weight of the world was on his shoulders. She slipped out before he noticed her, but the moment stuck. Elvis Presley wasn't just a star. He was a man, and men could break. Back in 2025, Maggie sat in her rental car outside the hospital, her mother's words looping in her mind. "Find the box. The truth about him." She gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. Her mother's stories about Graceland had always been warm, almost mythical, tales of Elvis sneaking into the kitchen for late-night snacks, or giving the staff Christmas bonuses with a wink. But a secret? That was new, and it burned like a coal in Maggie's chest. Maggie, a journalist for the Memphis Star, was used to chasing leads, corrupt politicians, shady developers, but this was personal. Her mother had carried this burden alone, and now it was Maggie's to unravel. She drove to her childhood home, a modest bungalow on the outskirts of Memphis, where fireflies still danced in the summer dusk. Inside, she dug through her mother's things, finding old photo albums stuffed with faded Polaroids. One showed Nancy, young and radiant, standing beside Tommy Carter in front of Graceland's gates. Maggie's heart ached. Tommy had been like an uncle, always tinkering with cars in their driveway, telling her stories of Memphis's glory days. He'd died a decade ago, but maybe he'd known something. Another photo caught her eye, Nancy in her maid's uniform, holding a broom, with Graceland's white columns in the background. Maggie traced her mother's smile, wondering what secrets hid behind it. Her phone buzzed, a text from her editor. "Got a story yet?" Maggie ignored it. This wasn't just a story. It was her mother's legacy, and maybe Elvis's too. She pulled up her laptop and searched for anything about Graceland's attic. The mansion was a museum now, its rooms frozen in time for tourists. Getting access to the attic would be a challenge, security was tight, and the Presley estate guarded its legacy fiercely. But Nancy's words were a fire in Maggie's chest. The truth about Elvis. Had he done something terrible? A scandal that could tarnish his name? Or was it something else? Something that could humanize the myth? Maggie leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Her mother had always said, "Love makes you do crazy things, Maggie. Things you die to protect." Was that what this was? A secret born of love, loyalty, or sacrifice? She needed answers, and they were somewhere in Graceland's shadows. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Maggie closed her laptop, her resolve hardening. Tomorrow, she'd call Graceland. She'd charm, beg, or break in if she had to. The box was out there, and with it, the truth her mother had carried for decades. Nancy Harper had lived in the king's shadow, a maid who'd seen his heart. Whatever she'd hidden, it wasn't just about Elvis. It was about her, a woman who'd loved, lost, and kept silent until her final breath. Nancy Harper was born in a Memphis summer so hot it felt like the devil himself was stoking the fires. It was 1940, and the city hummed with the blues, the clatter of streetcars, and the dreams of those who believed hard work could outrun poverty. Nancy grew up in a shotgun house on the edge of Beale Street, where the walls were thin and the air thick with her father's cigarette smoke and her mother's whispered prayers. The house had one bedroom, a sagging porch, and a kitchen where dreams went to die. But Nancy, even at 10, had eyes that sparkled with something bigger, a hunger for a life beyond the cracked linoleum and her father's drunken rages. Her father, Jimmy Harper, was a factory worker who spent his paychecks at the bar before they ever reached home. Her mother, Ruth, was a seamstress with hands worn raw from stitching dresses for women who'd never know her name. Nancy learned early that love could be a fragile thing, stretched thin by hunger and disappointment. But she also learned to find joy in small places, the jukebox at the corner diner, where she'd sway to Fats Domino, the library, where she'd lose herself in books about far-off places, and the moments when Tommy Carter, her neighbor and best friend, would sneak her a peppermint stick and make her laugh until her sides ached. Tommy was 2 years older, all lanky limbs and mischief, with a grin that could charm the grumpiest shopkeepers on Beale Street. His father fixed cars, and Tommy had grease under his nails by the time he was 12. One day, Nancy, he'd say, sprawled on her porch steps, "I'm gonna drive us outta here in a Cadillac, just like Elvis Presley." Nancy would roll her eyes but smile, because Tommy's dreams were contagious, and in Memphis, Elvis was already a whisper of something big, a local boy whose voice was starting to crackle through radios. By 1956, Nancy was 16, and Elvis was no longer just a whisper. His songs blared from every diner and car radio, his face plastered on magazines at the drugstore. Nancy would save her nickels to buy photoplay, studying his smoldering eyes and wondering what it was like to live a life that bright. She and Tommy would sneak into the Lowe's State Theater to watch Love Me Tender, giggling when the girls around them screamed. But for Nancy, it wasn't just about Elvis's looks or his voice. It was the way he seemed to carry Memphis in his soul, the same city that had shaped her, with its grit and its heart. Life at home was harder by then. Jimmy's drinking had worsened, and Ruth's health was fading, her coughs echoing through the house at night. Nancy took a job cleaning houses after school, her hands chapped from lye soap, her dreams tucked away like the books under her bed. Tommy was her anchor, always there with a joke or a ride in his father's beat-up Ford. "You're tougher than you look, Nancy Harper," he'd say, tossing her a wrench to help him tinker with an engine. She'd laugh, but she felt it, the strength growing inside her, forged by a life that demanded it. One night, as they sat on the roof of Tommy's garage, watching the Memphis skyline glow under a summer moon, he turned to her, his face serious for once. "You ever think about what you really want, Nancy? Not just gettin' by, but really livin'?" She looked at him, his brown eyes catching the starlight, and her heart stuttered. She wanted to say she dreamed of a life where she wasn't invisible, where her hands didn't ache from scrubbing, where love didn't come with a price. But instead, she shrugged. "I just want to be free, Tommy. Free to be me." He reached for her hand, his fingers warm and rough. "You will be. I'll make sure of it." For a moment, she believed him. But life had a way of making promises hard to keep. By 1962, Nancy was 22, and the world had shifted. Ruth had passed away the year before, her lungs giving out after years of strain. Jimmy was a ghost in their house, lost to whiskey and regret. Nancy was on her own, working double shifts cleaning houses, her dreams of freedom fraying at the edges. Tommy had landed a job fixing cars for the Presley entourage, a gig that paid better than his father's shop. He'd changed too, taller, broader, with a quiet confidence that made Nancy's stomach flip when he smiled. But he was still Tommy, the boy who'd once carved their initials into the oak tree behind her house. It was Tommy who got her the job at Graceland. "They need a maid," he'd told her one evening, leaning against his Chevy outside her house. "It's good money, Nancy, and it's steady. But it's a different world up there. Elvis, he's not like us. Don't let it pull you in too deep. Nancy had laughed, brushing off his warning. It's just a job, Tommy. I'm not gonna fall in love with a rock star. But as she stood at Graceland's gates on her first day, her uniform starched and her heart pounding, she felt the pull of something bigger. The mansion was a palace, its white columns and sprawling lawn a far cry from her crumbling porch. This was where Elvis Presley lived, where the world's eyes turned. And Nancy, for the first time, felt like she was stepping into history. Her first week was a whirlwind of learning the ropes. Lila May, a maid with a quick wit and a voice like honey, showed her how to polish the chandelier in the dining room without leaving a smudge, how to fold Elvis's shirts just so. He's particular about his things, Lila May said, her eyes twinkling. But he's got a good heart. Just don't expect him to notice you. Stars don't see the folks who keep their world spinning. Nancy nodded, but she couldn't help watching for him. She'd catch glimpses, Elvis striding through the hall in a silk shirt, laughing with his entourage, or sitting at the piano, his fingers coaxing out a melody that made her chest ache. He was magnetic, larger than life, but there was something else too, a shadow in his eyes, a weight he carried when he thought no one was watching. One evening, as she dusted the study, she heard him on the phone, his voice low and raw. "I'm tryin', Colonel," he said, pacing in his blue suede shoes. "But it's like I'm runnin' on empty. The movies, the shows, I just wanna sing what I feel, you know." Nancy froze, her dust rag limp in her hand. She'd heard her father sound like that, worn down by life, but this was different. Elvis was the king, with the world at his feet, yet he sounded lost. She slipped out before he saw her, but the moment burrowed into her heart. He wasn't just a star. He was a man, and men could break. In 2025, Maggie Harper sat in her childhood home, surrounded by her mother's things. The bungalow was quiet, the air heavy with grief and questions. She flipped through another photo album, her fingers tracing a picture of Nancy and Tommy, their faces young and hopeful. Maggie had always known her mother was tough, a woman who'd worked her hands raw to give her a better life. But this secret, the box, the truth about Elvis, felt like a door to a part of Nancy she'd never known. Maggie's phone buzzed again, her editor's name flashing. She ignored it, her mind on the attic at Graceland. What could her mother have hidden there? A scandal? A betrayal? Or something softer, something born of love? Nancy had always said, "Love makes you do crazy things, Maggie. Things you'd die to protect." Maggie wondered if that was the key, a love so deep it demanded silence. She stood, pacing the small living room. Tommy might have known something, but he was gone. Lila May, her mother's friend from Graceland, was a possibility, but Maggie hadn't seen her in years. The only way forward was the attic, and that meant getting into Graceland. She'd need to call in favors, maybe pull some strings with her press credentials. Whatever it took, she'd find that box. Outside, the Memphis night was alive with crickets and the distant hum of the city. Maggie stepped onto the porch, breathing in the familiar scent of honeysuckle. Her mother had stood here once, dreaming of a bigger life. Now, Maggie would carry that dream forward, chasing a truth that could change everything. Nancy Harper had never seen a house like Graceland. It wasn't just the size, though the mansion's sprawling rooms and manicured lawns dwarfed her childhood home on Beale Street. It was the way it felt alive, pulsing with music and laughter, as if the walls themselves hummed with Elvis Presley's energy. In the fall of 1962, Nancy was 3 weeks into her job as a maid, and every day felt like stepping into a dream she didn't quite belong in. The white columns gleamed under the Memphis sun, the air smelled of magnolias and polished wood, and Nancy, at 22, was learning to navigate a world where stars walked the halls and secrets hid in the shadows. Her days started at dawn, when the city was still rubbing sleep from its eyes. She'd catch a bus from her rundown neighborhood, her starched uniform pressed to perfection, her hands still rough from years of scrubbing floors. At Graceland, she was one of a dozen staff, maids, cooks, groundskeepers, all moving like gears in a machine to keep the king's world spinning. Lila May, the sharp-witted maid who'd become her guide, had a saying, "We're the invisible hands, Nancy. We make the magic happen, but don't expect a spotlight." Nancy nodded, but deep down, she couldn't help feeling a thrill every time she crossed the threshold. The work was grueling, polishing chandeliers until they sparkled, scrubbing the jungle room's green shag carpet, folding linens with military precision. But there were moments of wonder too. The dining room table, where Elvis hosted raucous dinners, was set with china finer than anything Nancy had ever touched. The gold records on the walls glinted like promises, each one a testament to a voice that had changed the world. And the piano in the living room, where Elvis sometimes played late at night, seemed to hold echoes of his soul. Nancy would pause, her dust rag forgotten, imagining what it felt like to create something that made millions scream. Lila May was her anchor in this whirlwind. A wiry woman in her 30s, with a laugh that could cut through the morning fog, Lila May had worked at Graceland since Elvis bought it in '57. She knew every quirk of the house, the creaky stair in the back hall, the window that stuck in the study, and every rumor about its owner. "He's a good man," she told Nancy one morning as they polished silver in the kitchen. "Gives us Christmas bonuses that'd make your head spin. But he's got demons, girl. Fame ain't no picnic." Nancy wanted to ask what she meant, but Lila May's eyes flicked to the doorway, and Nancy understood, walls had ears at Graceland. The staff were loyal, but gossip was currency, and Nancy was still an outsider. She kept her head down, learning the rhythm of the house. Mornings were quiet, with Elvis often sleeping late after long nights. Afternoons brought a flurry of activity. His entourage, the Memphis Mafia, sprawling across the lawn, playing touch football or tinkering with his cars. Evenings were unpredictable, sometimes Elvis was off filming in Hollywood, sometimes he hosted parties that spilled into the early hours. Her first real glimpse of him came on a humid October evening. She was tidying the study, a cozy room with dark wood and leather chairs, when Elvis wandered in, a glass of sweet tea in his hand. He was taller than she'd expected, his black hair tousled, his white shirt unbuttoned just enough to show a glimpse of chest. He didn't notice her at first, his eyes fixed on a stack of records by the phonograph. Nancy froze, her heart pounding. She was supposed to be invisible, but she couldn't look away. He picked up a gospel record, Mahalia Jackson, and slid it onto the player. The needle scratched, and a soulful hymn filled the room. Elvis closed his eyes, swaying slightly, as if the music was a lifeline. Nancy's breath caught. She'd never seen someone look so at peace, yet so burdened. Then he turned, catching her in the corner of his eye. "Didn't see you there," he said, his voice warm, with that Memphis drawl that made her knees weak. "You're the new girl, right?" Nancy nodded, her tongue stuck to the roof of her mouth. "Yes, sir. Nancy Harper." He smiled, a crooked grin that lit up the room. "No, sir," needed, Nancy. "Just Elvis." "You like Mahalia?" She swallowed, clutching her dust rag like a shield. "Yes, Elvis. She's got a voice like heaven." He chuckled, leaning against the desk. "Ain't that the truth? Sometimes I think gospel's the only thing keepin' me sane." His eyes held hers for a moment, and she saw it again, that shadow, a flicker of something heavy beneath the charm. Then he nodded toward the door. "Don't let me keep you from your work. Gotta keep this place shinier than my Cadillac." Nancy laughed, a nervous sound, and hurried out, her cheeks burning. It was just a moment, a fleeting kindness, but it felt like a spark. Elvis Presley had seen her, spoken her name. For a girl who'd spent her life invisible, it was a memory she'd carry like a treasure. But Graceland wasn't all glamour. Nancy learned quickly that the mansion was a pressure cooker, where fame's weight pressed on everyone. Elvis was often away, filming movies or performing, but when he was home, the house buzzed with tension. The Memphis Mafia, his friends and bodyguards, were a rowdy bunch, loyal to a fault but quick to bicker. Priscilla, Elvis's young girlfriend, was a quiet presence, her beauty almost otherworldly, but her eyes held a wariness that made Nancy uneasy. The staff whispered about her, about the strain of loving a man the world claimed as its own. One night, as Nancy and Lila May scrubbed the kitchen after a late party, Lila May lowered her voice. "You see how he looks sometimes? Like he's carrying the whole world. That's what fame does. Eats you up inside." Nancy nodded, thinking of Elvis's shadowed eyes in the study. She wanted to ask more, but footsteps echoed in the hall, and they fell silent. The next day, Tommy Carter stopped by, his Chevy parked outside the gates. He was working as a mechanic now, keeping Elvis's fleet of cars purring. Nancy met him on her break, sitting on a bench under a magnolia tree. "You look tired," he said, handing her a Coke, the bottle cold against her palm. "It's a lot," she admitted, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "But it's exciting, you know. Like I'm part of something big." Tommy frowned, his brown eyes searching hers. "Just be careful, Nancy. This place, it's got a way of pulling folks in, making 'em forget who they are." She laughed, but it was forced. "I'm still me, Tommy. Just cleanin' a fancier house." He didn't smile back. "I know you, Nancy Harper. You dream big. Just don't let those dreams burn you." His words stuck with her, a warning she couldn't shake. She was already caught in Graceland's orbit, drawn to the man at its center. Elvis was kind, leaving tips for the staff, joking with the cooks, but Nancy saw glimpses of his struggles. Late at night, she'd hear him pacing the halls, or catch him staring out a window, lost in thought. Once, she found a bottle of pills tucked behind a couch cushion, its label smudged but unmistakable. She hid it in her apron and slipped it to Lila May, who sighed and said, "Don't ask, Nancy. Just keep moving." In 2025, Maggie Harper sat at her mother's kitchen table, surrounded by photo albums and memories. The Polaroid of Nancy at Graceland stared back at her, her mother's smile both familiar and foreign. Maggie's grief was raw, a wound that hadn't begun to heal, but her mother's final words, "Find the box." The truth about him, were a fire driving her forward. What had Nancy seen at Graceland? What truth had she buried in that attic? Maggie's laptop glowed with research on Graceland's history. The attic wasn't open to tourists, but it was rumored to hold old costumes, records, maybe even Elvis's personal papers. Could her mother's box be there, gathering dust among the relics? Maggie's journalist instincts kicked in, she'd need access, and that meant navigating the Presley estate's gatekeepers. She jotted down names, the museum director, a local historian, maybe even Lila May, if she was still alive. Her phone buzzed again, her editor's name flashing. "Deadlines looming, Harper." Maggie ignored it. This wasn't about a headline. It was about her mother, a woman who'd lived in the shadows of a legend. Nancy had always said, "Love makes you do crazy things." Was that what the box held, a secret born of love, loyalty, or something darker? Maggie stood, pacing the bungalow's creaky floorboards. Outside, Memphis hummed with life, its music and history as alive as ever. She'd start at Graceland tomorrow, armed with her press pass and her mother's memory. Whatever Nancy had hidden, it was more than a maid's story. It was a piece of Elvis Presley's heart, and Maggie was determined to find it. The summer of 1963 draped Memphis in a heat so thick it clung to the skin like a second shirt. At Graceland, the air conditioners hummed, but the mansion felt like it was holding its breath. Nancy Harper, now a year into her job as a maid, had learned the rhythm of the house. When to slip in and out of rooms, when to avoid the Memphis Mafia's rowdy card games, when to listen for the soft strum of Elvis's guitar in the quiet hours. But lately, the rhythm was off. The king was home more often, between movies and tours, and the air carried a tension Nancy couldn't name. It was as if fame, that glittering beast, was tightening its grip on everyone inside those white walls. Nancy's days were a blur of routine, polishing the dining room's crystal chandelier until it caught the light like a constellation, scrubbing the jungle room's green carpet, folding towels in the upstairs bathroom where Elvis's cologne lingered. She'd grown used to the mansion's opulence, but it still felt like a dream she might wake from. Lila May, her friend and fellow maid, was her compass, always ready with a quip or a warning. "Don't get too comfortable, girl," Lila May said one morning, wiping down the kitchen counter. "This place is a circus, and we're just sweeping up after the elephants." Nancy laughed, but she felt the truth in it. Graceland was a world of extremes, laughter and music one moment, strained silences the next. Elvis was at the center, his charisma a gravitational pull. She'd see him in flashes, joking with his entourage by the pool, signing autographs for fans at the gates, or slipping into the study with a faraway look. He was kind to the staff, slipping them extra cash or thanking them with that crooked smile, but Nancy noticed the shadows under his eyes, the way his hands shook sometimes when he thought no one was watching. One sweltering July afternoon, as Nancy dusted the living room, she overheard a conversation that made her stomach twist. Elvis was in the adjacent music room, his voice sharp, a tone she'd never heard from him. "I'm tellin' you, Colonel, these movies are killin' me," he said, the words clipped. "I'm singin' fluff, not soul. I need a break, or I'm gonna lose it." Nancy froze, her dust rag hovering over a framed photo of Elvis with President Kennedy. The Colonel, Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, was a name whispered with both awe and fear among the staff. She'd never met him, but his presence loomed, a puppet master pulling strings from afar. His voice crackled through the phone, loud enough for Nancy to catch. "You don't get to take breaks, son. The world wants Elvis Presley, and we're giving Elvis Presley. Now, you got that Vegas show comin' up. Don't mess this up." Elvis slammed something, a fist, maybe, against a table. "I ain't a machine, Colonel. I can't keep churning out this garbage." The rawness in his voice sent a chill down Nancy's spine. She slipped out of the room, her heart pounding. The king, the man who'd made the world swoon, sounded like he was drowning. She wanted to do something, say something, but she was just a maid. Invisible. That evening, Nancy met Tommy Carter outside Graceland's gates. He was leaning against his Chevy, a cigarette dangling from his lips, his mechanic's coveralls smudged with grease. Tommy had been working on Elvis's cars for 2 years now, tuning up Cadillacs and Lincolns with a skill that made the Memphis Mafia trust him. But he looked uneasy, his brown eyes scanning the mansion like it was a storm cloud. "You okay?" he asked, flicking his cigarette to the ground. "You look like you seen a ghost." Nancy sat on the hood of his car, the metal warm under her hands. "It's just, this place. It's heavier than I thought. Elvis, he's not what people think he is." Tommy's jaw tightened. "Told you, Nancy. That world up there. It's a trap. You're getting too close." She bristled, crossing her arms. "I'm not close to anything. I'm just doing my job." He stepped closer, his voice low. "I see how you look at him. Like he's some kinda dream. But he's a man, Nancy, and men like him. They break things without meaning to." His words stung, mostly because they held a sliver of truth. Nancy admired Elvis, not just his talent, but the glimpses of his heart she'd seen, like that night in the study when he'd played Mahalia Jackson and spoken her name. But she wasn't a fool. She knew her place. Still, Tommy's warning felt like a challenge, and Nancy Harper had never been one to back down. "I can handle myself, Tommy," she said, sliding off the hood. "I'm not some starry-eyed kid." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Just don't forget who you are, okay? You're Nancy Harper, toughest girl I know. Don't let Graceland change that." She wanted to argue, but the weight of the day, the overheard argument, Elvis's raw voice, pressed on her. Instead, she nodded, and Tommy drove her home, the silence between them heavy with unspoken fears. The tension at Graceland only grew as 1963 bled into 1964. Elvis was filming Viva Las Vegas, and when he was home, the mansion felt like a pressure cooker. Priscilla was around more often, her presence a quiet storm. Nancy admired her elegance, her perfectly styled hair, her soft voice, but there was a distance in her eyes, like she was guarding something fragile. The staff whispered about her and Elvis, about the strain of a love stretched thin by fame. Nancy tried not to listen, but the rumors were impossible to ignore. One night, as Nancy polished the staircase banister, she saw Elvis slip out of his bedroom, his face pale and drawn. He didn't notice her, his steps unsteady as he headed for the kitchen. She followed at a distance, her heart in her throat. In the dim light, she saw him fumble with a pill bottle, his hands shaking as he poured 2 capsules into his palm. He stared at them for a long moment, then swallowed them with a glass of water, his shoulders slumping. Nancy's breath caught. She'd found pills before, hidden in odd places, but seeing him like this was different. It was like watching a star flicker, threatening to go out. She didn't tell Lila May. She didn't tell anyone. Instead, she tucked the moment away, a secret she carried like a stone. Elvis was struggling, and she felt a strange duty to protect him, even if it meant staying silent. It was her first taste of loyalty's cost, and it wouldn't be her last. In 2025, Maggie Harper sat in her rental car outside Graceland, the mansion's gates looming in the dusk. She'd spent the day on the phone, pulling strings to get access to the attic. The museum director had been polite but firm. The attic was off-limits, used for storage, not part of the tour. Maggie's press pass hadn't swayed him, but she wasn't giving up. Her mother's words, "Find the box." The truth about him, were a drumbeat in her mind. She opened her laptop, scrolling through notes from her research. Elvis's life was a well-trodden story, his rise, his movies, his comeback, his tragic end, but there were gaps, moments the public never saw. Nancy had been there, a witness to the private Elvis. What had she seen that was worth hiding for decades? A scandal? A betrayal? Or something softer, something that could humanize the myth? Maggie's thoughts drifted to Tommy Carter. He'd been a constant in her childhood, a gruff but kind figure who'd taught her to change a tire and told her stories of Memphis's heyday. Had he known about the box? She made a note to track down his old garage, see if anyone there remembered him. Lila May was another lead. If she was still alive, she might know something. Her phone buzzed, her editor's name flashing. "Harper, you're killing me. Where's the story?" Maggie typed a quick reply, "Working on something big. Give me time." This wasn't about a deadline. It was about her mother, a woman who'd lived in the shadows of a legend and carried a secret to her grave. The Memphis night was alive with crickets and the distant wail of a blues guitar. Maggie looked at Graceland's gates, their iron curves a barrier between her and the truth. She thought of her mother's favorite saying, "Love makes you do crazy things." Whatever Nancy had hidden, it was tied to that love, maybe for Elvis, maybe for someone else. Tomorrow, Maggie would find a way in. The box was waiting, and with it, a truth that could change everything. The Memphis night was thick with August heat in 1964, the kind that made the air feel like a warm blanket you couldn't shake off. At Graceland, the mansion was quiet for once, the Memphis Mafia scattered to their own homes or bars, the fans at the gates dwindled to a few diehards. Nancy Harper, now 24 and a seasoned maid, moved through the darkened halls, her footsteps soft on the plush carpet. She was finishing a late shift, tidying the music room where Elvis's guitars leaned against a velvet couch like silent sentinels. The house felt different at night, less a palace, more a home, with secrets tucked into its shadows. Nancy had grown accustomed to Graceland's rhythm over the past 2 years, but the tension she'd sensed last summer hadn't faded. If anything, it had deepened. Elvis was home from filming Girl Happy, his schedule a relentless churn of movies and performances that left him hollow-eyed. Nancy saw it in the way he moved, slower, like he was carrying an invisible weight. She'd kept her distance since overhearing his argument with Colonel Parker, but the memory of his raw voice lingered, a reminder that the king was human, fragile in ways the world didn't see. She was polishing a gold record, Blue Hawaii, its frame gleaming under her cloth, when she heard footsteps. Elvis appeared in the doorway, his white shirt rumpled, his hair falling into his eyes. He looked startled to see her, then offered a tired smile. "Burnin' the midnight oil, Nancy." Her heart skipped, but she kept her voice steady. "Just finishin' up, Elvis. Didn't expect anyone to be awake." He leaned against the doorframe, a glass of water in his hand. "Can't sleep. Mine's racin' like a '57 Chevy." His drawl was soft, but there was a tremor in it, a crack in the charm. He gestured to the couch. "You wanna sit a spell? I could use the company." Nancy hesitated. Staff weren't supposed to linger with Elvis, it was an unspoken rule, enforced by the sharp eyes of the Memphis Mafia and Priscilla's quiet presence. But his eyes held a plea, and Nancy, against her better judgment, nodded. She sat on the edge of the couch, her hands folded in her lap, feeling like she'd stepped into a dream she might not wake from. Elvis sank into an armchair, his gaze drifting to the ceiling. "You ever feel like you're living someone else's life, Nancy? Like you're playing a part, and you don't know the lines?" She blinked, surprised by the question. Sometimes, she admitted, thinking of her own dreams, buried under years of scrubbing floors. "But I figure most folks feel that way now and then." He chuckled, a low, bitter sound. "Most folks ain't got the world watchin' 'em. I love singin', Nancy. Always have. But this," he waved a hand, taking in the room, the mansion, the weight of fame. "This ain't what I signed up for. The movies, the schedules, it's like I'm losing me." Nancy's chest tightened. She'd seen glimpses of his struggles, the pills, the pacing, but hearing him say it was different. "You're still you," she said softly. "The man who sings gospel like it's a prayer. That's real." His eyes met hers, and for a moment, the room felt smaller, the air charged. "You're sweet to say that. Most folks just see the king, not the man." He paused, then leaned forward. "What about you, Nancy Harper? What's your story?" She laughed, nervous, her cheeks warming. "Ain't much to tell. Grew up poor, workin' hard. Graceland's the fanciest place I've ever been." He grinned, the first real smile she'd seen from him all night. "Bet you got dreams bigger than this place. You got a spark, I can tell." The compliment caught her off guard, and she looked away, her fingers twisting in her apron. They talked for an hour, about music, Memphis, the way the city's soul seeped into your bones. He told her about singing gospel with his mama as a boy, and she shared how she'd sneak into juke joints to hear the blues. It was easy, natural, like they were just two people, not a star and a maid. But when Nancy glanced at the clock, 2 a.m., reality crashed in. She stood, smoothing her uniform. "I should go. Early shift tomorrow." Elvis nodded, his eyes softer now. "Thanks, Nancy. For listenin'. Means more than you know." She slipped out, her heart racing, the memory of his voice a melody she couldn't shake. But as she left, she didn't see the figure in the hallway, Priscilla, her silhouette framed by the dim light, her face unreadable. The next morning, Graceland buzzed with whispers. Nancy felt it the moment she arrived, the staff's eyes darting her way as she tied on her apron. Lila May pulled her aside in the kitchen, her voice low. "Girl, you got tongues waggin'. Someone saw you talkin' to Elvis last night. Late." Nancy's stomach dropped. "We were just talkin', Lila. He couldn't sleep. I was there." Lila May raised an eyebrow. Don't matter what it was. Folks see what they want to see. And Priscilla? She's got eyes like a hawk. Nancy's cheeks burned. She'd heard the rumors about Priscilla's jealousy, the way she guarded Elvis like a treasure. Nancy had no intention of crossing that line, she knew her place, but the conversation had felt like a lifeline, for both her and Elvis. Still, the whispers followed her all day, a low hum of judgment that made her feel exposed. At lunch, she overheard two maids in the pantry. Nancy thinks she's special, cozy and up to the boss, one muttered. She's gonna learn the hard way. Nancy's hands shook as she scrubbed the sink, anger and shame warring inside her. She wasn't chasing Elvis. She was just there. But Graceland was a fishbowl, and every move was watched. That afternoon, Priscilla called her to the upstairs parlor. Nancy's heart pounded as she climbed the stairs, her palms sweaty. Priscilla sat on a velvet chair, her beauty almost unreal, porcelain skin, dark eyes, a dress that cost more than Nancy's yearly wage. Nancy, she said, her voice calm but edged, you've been doing good work here. But we have boundaries. You understand, don't you? Nancy nodded, her throat tight. Yes, ma'am. I didn't mean no disrespect. Priscilla's smile was thin. I'm sure you didn't. Just keep it professional. For everyone's sake. The words were polite, but they cut deep. Nancy left the parlor, her face hot with humiliation. She'd crossed no line, yet she felt like a thief caught in the act. That evening, she told Lila May, who sighed and squeezed her hand. You're learnin', girl. This place loves its drama. Just keep your head down. But keeping her head down felt like betraying the spark Elvis had seen in her. She wasn't in love with him. Not like that, but his words had stirred something, a reminder of the dreams she'd buried. And now, those dreams were tangled with guilt and the weight of Graceland's eyes. Tommy Carter was waiting for her at the gates, his Chevy idling. He took one look at her face and frowned. What's wrong, Nancy? She climbed into the passenger seat, her hands twisting in her lap. Just a rough day. Folks talkin' nonsense. Tommy's eyes narrowed. About you and Elvis? Her head snapped up. How'd you know? He snorted, starting the car. This town's one big gossip mill. Heard it at the garage. You gotta be careful, Nancy. He's a star. You're, you. The word stung, but she knew he meant well. We just talked, Tommy. He's lonely. You ever think about that? What it's like to have the world and still feel empty? Tommy's hands tightened on the wheel. I think about you. You're getting caught up in his world, and it's gonna hurt you. She wanted to argue, but the weight of the day. Priscilla's warning, the staff's whispers, silenced her. Tommy drove her home, the Memphis skyline a blur of lights. She thought of Elvis's voice, raw and real, and wondered if she'd made a mistake letting him see her. But deep down, she knew she'd do it again. Because for 1 hour, she hadn't been invisible. In 2025, Maggie Harper stood outside Graceland's gates, her phone pressed to her ear. She'd spent the morning calling contacts, trying to get access to the attic. The museum director had stonewalled her again, but a local historian had promised to pull some strings. Maggie's notebook was filled with questions. What was the box? What truth had her mother hidden? And why had it mattered so much? She thought of her mother's stories, how Elvis would leave tips for the staff, how he'd sing gospel in the quiet hours. But the Nancy in those stories was a shadow, always on the edges. What had pulled her into the center? Maggie's eyes drifted to the mansion, its white columns glowing under floodlights. The truth was in there, locked in a box her mother had died to protect. Her phone buzzed, her editor, again. Harper, you're on thin ice. Story or bust. Maggie typed back, got something huge. Trust me. This wasn't about a scoop. It was about Nancy, a woman who'd loved fiercely enough to keep a secret for decades. Maggie would find that box, even if it meant breaking every rule. The Memphis spring of 1965 was restless, with dogwoods blooming and thunderstorms rumbling over the Mississippi River. At Graceland, the mansion mirrored the city's unease, its halls filled with a tension that clung like damp air. Nancy Harper, now 25, moved through her tasks with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd learned to blend into the background. 2 years at Graceland had taught her to anticipate the house's needs, when to freshen the flowers in the dining room, when to avoid the Memphis Mafia's late-night poker games, when to listen for the soft creak of Elvis Presley's footsteps in the early hours. But lately, those footsteps were heavier, and the man they belonged to seemed to be slipping further from the king the world adored. Nancy had seen the cracks in Elvis's facade before, his shadowed eyes, his raw voice during that phone call with Colonel Parker, but the past year had deepened them. He was home more often, between filming Harem Scarum and preparing for a new tour, and the pressure was palpable. The staff whispered about his mood swings, his late-night pacing, the bottles of pills that appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Nancy tried to focus on her work. Polishing the jungle room's teak statues, folding linen scented with lavender, but her eyes kept drifting to Elvis, searching for the man who'd spoken to her in the music room, the one who'd seen her spark. One rainy April evening, as thunder rattled the windows, Nancy was cleaning the upstairs hallway when she heard a crash from Elvis's bedroom. Her heart leapt, and she hesitated, knowing maids weren't supposed to intrude. But the sound came again, a heavy thud, like furniture falling. She knocked softly, her voice trembling. "Elvis? You okay?" No answer. She pushed the door open, her breath catching. Elvis was slumped on the floor, his back against the bed, a shattered lamp at his feet. His face was pale, his eyes glassy, and an orange pill bottle lay spilled across the carpet. Nancy's stomach twisted. She'd seen those bottles before, tucked in drawers or hidden behind cushions, but this was different. He looked lost, like a man drowning in plain sight. "Elvis." She knelt beside him, her hands hovering, unsure. "What happened? Are you hurt?" He blinked, his gaze unfocused. "Nancy. I just tripped. Damn lamp." His words slurred slightly, and he tried to laugh, but it came out weak. He reached for the pills, his fingers clumsy, and Nancy acted on instinct, scooping them up before he could. "Let me help," she said, her voice steady despite the panic in her chest. She poured the pills back into the bottle, her hands shaking, and set it on the nightstand. "You need to rest. Let me get someone." "No." His voice was sharp, his hand grabbing her wrist. "Don't tell nobody. Please, Nancy. I'm fine. Just tired." She met his eyes, and the plea in them broke something inside her. This wasn't the king of rock and roll. This was a man teetering on the edge, and she couldn't look away. "Okay," she whispered. "I won't tell. But you gotta be careful, Elvis." He nodded, his grip loosening. "You're a good one, Nancy Harper. Don't know what I'd do without folks like you." She helped him to the bed, her heart pounding as she cleaned up the broken lamp and tucked the pill bottle into her apron. She'd dispose of it later, somewhere no one would find it. As she left the room, the storm outside roared, and Nancy felt like she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She'd protected Elvis, but at what cost? The next morning, the incident weighed on her like a stone. She wanted to tell Lila May, her confidante and fellow maid, but the words stuck in her throat. Lila May had always been clear about Graceland's rules: see nothing, say nothing. But Nancy's silence felt different, heavier, like a secret she was choosing to keep. At breakfast in the staff kitchen, Lila May noticed her distraction, her sharp eyes narrowing. "You look like you're carrying the world, girl. What's eaten you?" Nancy forced a smile, stirring her coffee. "Just tired. Long night." Lila May leaned closer, her voice low. Don't lie to me, Nancy Harper. I heard about you and Elvis in the music room last year. Now you're actin' all jumpy. You in over your head? Nancy's cheeks burned. The rumors from that night had never fully died, and now they felt like a trap closing around her. It's not like that, Lila. I'm just doin' my job. Lila May's lips pursed. Your job ain't to play savior. He's got enough folks for that. You keep this up, you're gonna lose more than your job. Her words were harsh, but her eyes held worry, and Nancy felt a pang of guilt. Lila May had been her rock, but this secret, Elvis's fall, the pills, was too big to share. The rest of the day, Nancy felt the staff's eyes on her, their whispers sharper since Priscilla's warning. She threw herself into her work, scrubbing floors until her knuckles ached, trying to drown out the memory of Elvis's glassy eyes. But the secret clung to her, a shadow she couldn't shake. That evening, Tommy Carter proposed. They were at a diner on Beale Street, the jukebox playing Sam Cooke's "A Change Is Gonna Come." Tommy had driven her there after her shift, his Chevy smelling of oil and leather. He was quieter than usual, his hands fidgeting with a napkin. Nancy, he said, his brown eyes steady, I've been savon up. Got a job lined up at a bigger garage. I want us to start a life. You and me. Marry me. Nancy's heart stopped. She'd known this was coming. Tommy's love had been a constant since they were kids, carved into that oak tree behind her house. But the words landed like a weight. She thought of Graceland, of Elvis's plea, of the pill bottle hidden in her purse. She loved Tommy, but her loyalty to Elvis, to the man who'd seen her spark, was a chain she couldn't break. I need time, Tommy, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Things are complicated right now. His face fell, but he nodded, his jaw tight. It's him, ain't it? That place. It's got you wrapped up. It's not like that, she said, but the words felt hollow. Tommy drove her home in silence, the city lights blurring past. Nancy clutched her purse, the pill bottle a burning reminder of her choice. She'd protected Elvis, but she was losing Tommy, and maybe herself. In 2025, Maggie Harper sat in a Memphis coffee shop, her laptop open to a grainy photo of Graceland's attic from a 1980s estate sale. Her mother's words, "Find the box." The truth about him, were a pulse in her mind. She'd spent days chasing leads, but the museum director was immovable, and her historian contact had come up empty. The attic was a fortress, guarded by the Presley estate's iron grip. Maggie's only hope was Lila May, her mother's old friend, who might still be in Memphis. She'd tracked down Lila May's address through an old staff directory, a crumbling booklet her mother had kept. Lila May was in her 90s now, living in a nursing home across town. Maggie's call to the home had been brief, a nurse confirmed Lila May was lucid but frail. Maggie felt a flicker of hope. If anyone knew about Nancy's secret, it was Lila May. Her phone buzzed, her editor's name flashing. "Harper, you're testing me. What's this big story?" Maggie typed back, "It's personal. I'll deliver." She wasn't sure if she would. This wasn't about headlines, it was about her mother, a woman who'd chosen loyalty over love, who'd carried a secret heavy enough to define her life. Maggie thought of Tommy Carter, his kind eyes and gruff voice. He'd died when she was a teenager, but his stories of Graceland had been vivid, tales of Elvis's cars, the mansion's chaos. Had he known about the box? She made a note to visit his old garage, see if any old-timers remembered him. Every lead was a step closer to the truth. Outside, the Memphis sky was gray, promising rain. Maggie closed her laptop, her resolve hardening. Her mother had sacrificed something for Elvis, something that had cost her Tommy, maybe more. Maggie would find that box, even if it meant tearing through every shadow in Graceland. Nancy's secret wasn't just about Elvis, it was about the woman who'd loved him enough to break her own heart. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The Memphis summer of 1966 was a scorcher, the kind that turned Graceland's lawns into brittle patches and made the air shimmer with heat. Inside the mansion, the air conditioners groaned, but the real tension came from within. Nancy Harper, now 26, moved through her duties with a quiet intensity, her hands steady as she polished silver or swept the jungle room's shag carpet. 3 years at Graceland had made her part of the mansion's pulse, but the weight of Elvis Presley's struggles, and her own loyalty to him, was a constant shadow. The night she'd found him slumped on his bedroom floor, pills scattered, had changed her. She'd kept his secret, but it had carved a line between her and the people she loved, especially Tommy Carter, whose proposal she'd left unanswered. The mansion was quieter these days. Elvis was filming Spin Out, his schedule a relentless grind of Hollywood sets and recording sessions. When he was home, he seemed more withdrawn, his laughter rarer, his eyes often hidden behind sunglasses. Nancy noticed the pill bottles more frequently now, tucked in drawers or left on nightstands, and she'd taken to quietly disposing of them, her heart heavy with each one she hid. She told herself it was for his own good, but the silence was eating at her, straining her friendship with Lila May, who'd grown distant since their argument over Nancy's closeness to Elvis. One sweltering July afternoon, Nancy was sent to the attic to fetch a box of old Christmas decorations. The attic was a forgotten corner of Graceland, a maze of dusty trunks and cobwebbed corners, lit by a single bulb swinging from the rafters. The air smelled of mildew and memories, and Nancy's footsteps echoed on the creaky floorboards. She found the decorations quickly, tinsel and ornaments in a cardboard box, but as she turned to leave, her foot brushed against something solid under a tarp. Curiosity got the better of her. She lifted the tarp, revealing a small, locked wooden box, its surface worn but carved with intricate swirls. It was heavy, the lock rusted but sturdy, and a faded label read EAP, Elvis Aaron Presley. Nancy's heart raced. She shouldn't touch it, but her hands moved anyway, brushing dust from the lid. Inside, she glimpsed a stack of letters tied with twine, a few Polaroids tucked among them. The top letter was addressed to "My Dearest," in a woman's handwriting, not Priscilla's. Nancy's breath caught, she knew she was trespassing, but the box felt like a key to the man she'd seen unraveling. She opened one letter, her fingers trembling. "I'll always love you, E," it read, "but we can't keep this up. It's too much for both of us." A Polaroid showed a young woman, not Priscilla, standing beside Elvis, her smile soft but sad. Nancy's mind spun. Who was this woman? What had she meant to Elvis? And why was this hidden away? The sound of footsteps on the attic stairs jolted her. She shoved the letter back, locked the box, and pushed it under the tarp, her heart pounding. Lila May appeared, her eyes narrowing. "What you doin' up here, Nancy? You look like you seen a ghost." "Just gettin' the decorations," Nancy said, her voice too quick. She hefted the cardboard box, avoiding Lila May's gaze. But Lila May's silence was heavy, and Nancy knew her friend suspected something. That night, Nancy made a choice. She returned to the attic after hours, using a flashlight to avoid detection, and hid the box deeper, behind a stack of old stage costumes. Whatever it held, it was Elvis's secret, and she'd protect it, even if it meant carrying another burden. The decision haunted her. The next day, she avoided Lila May, whose sharp eyes seemed to see through her. At lunch, Nancy overheard two maids whispering about a mystery woman from Elvis's past, a rumor that had surfaced and died years ago. Nancy's stomach twisted. Did the box hold the truth behind that rumor? She wanted to ask Elvis, to understand why he'd hidden this part of himself, but she couldn't. He was barely home, and when he was surrounded by his entourage, untouchable. Tommy Carter noticed the change in her. He'd been distant since his proposal, his visits to Graceland rarer, but he showed up one evening, his Chevy parked outside the gates. "You're pullin' away, Nancy," he said, his voice rough. "What's goin' on? Is it him?" Nancy leaned against the gate, the metal cool against her back. "It's not what you think, Tommy. I'm just tryin' to do what's right." He stepped closer, his brown eyes searching hers. "Right for who? Him? Or you? You're losing yourself in that place." His words cut deep, but she couldn't tell him about the box, the letters, the woman in the Polaroid. It wasn't her story to share. "I'm fine," she lied, forcing a smile. "Just give me time." Tommy shook his head, his jaw tight. "I love you, Nancy, but I can't keep waiting for you to choose." He drove off, leaving her alone in the dusk, the weight of her choices heavier than ever. In 2025, Maggie Harper stood outside the nursing home where Lila May lived, her heart pounding as she clutched a photo of her mother and Lila May from the Graceland days. The past week had been a blur of dead ends. The museum director had refused her access to the attic, citing preservation concerns, and her historian contact had found no records of a mysterious box. But Lila May was her last hope, a living link to her mother's time at Graceland. Inside, the nursing home smelled of disinfectant and old flowers, a stark contrast to the vibrant Memphis outside. Lila May, now 92, sat in a wheelchair by a window, her hair white but her eyes still sharp. Maggie introduced herself, showing the photo. "I'm Nancy Harper's daughter. She passed away last month. She told me to find a box in Graceland's attic. Something about Elvis. Do you know anything?" Lila May's gaze hardened, her lips pursing. Nancy always did carry too much. "That box. I saw her fussin' with something in the attic once, back in '66. She wouldn't tell me what. Said it was for Elvis's sake." Maggie's pulse quickened. "What was in it? Did she ever say?" Lila May shook her head. "She kept it close, like it was her burden to bear. But I'll tell you this, Nancy loved that man, not like a lover, but like he was family. Whatever's in that box, it's big. And it hurt her to keep it." Maggie thanked her, her mind racing. A box from 1966, hidden for Elvis's sake. She left the nursing home, her resolve stronger. She'd need to get into that attic, even if it meant sneaking in. Her mother's secret was tied to love, to loyalty, and Maggie was determined to uncover it. Back at her hotel, Maggie's phone buzzed, her editor, relentless. "Harper, you're out of time. Story or you're done." She typed back, "I'm close. This is bigger than you know." She wasn't sure if she'd publish the truth. This was about her mother, a woman who'd sacrificed everything for a man the world worshipped. Maggie thought of Tommy Carter, his love for Nancy unreturned, and wondered if the box held the key to her mother's choices. Outside, the Memphis sky was ablaze with stars, the city's heartbeat echoing in the distance. Maggie looked toward Graceland, its silhouette a reminder of the past. The box was up there, hidden among the relics of a legend. And with it, a truth that had shaped her mother's life, and might reshape Elvis's legacy. The Memphis winter of 1967 was bitter, with gray skies and a chill that seeped into Graceland's bones. Nancy Harper, now 27, felt the cold in more ways than one. 3 years as a maid had woven her into the mansion's fabric, but the threads were fraying. Elvis Presley, the man who'd once lit up the world, was fading before her eyes, and the secret she'd uncovered in the attic, the locked box with its letters and photos, hung over her like a storm cloud. She'd hidden it deeper among the costumes, telling herself it was for Elvis's sake, but the weight of it was crushing her. Graceland was a different place now. The parties were louder, the Memphis Mafia rowdier, but the laughter felt forced. Elvis was filming Clambake, his 10th movie in 4 years, and the grind was taking its toll. When he was home, his eyes were bloodshot, his movements sluggish, his charm dimmed by exhaustion. Nancy saw the pill bottles more often, tucked in jacket pockets, scattered on bathroom counters. And each one was a reminder of the night she'd found him slumped on his bedroom floor. She'd kept that secret and the one in the attic, but it was costing her. Lila May barely spoke to her now, their friendship strained by Nancy's silence. Tommy Carter, her childhood love, was a ghost, his visits rare since she'd hesitated on his proposal. One January evening, as snow dusted Graceland's lawns, Nancy was cleaning the music room when she heard Elvis's voice, low and ragged, from the hallway. "I can't keep this up, Red," he said to one of his bodyguards. "These pills, they're supposed to help, but I feel like I'm drowning." Nancy's heart clenched. She peeked out, seeing Elvis lean against the wall, his face pale, his hands trembling. Red, a burly member of the Memphis Mafia, clapped a hand on his shoulder. "You'll be fine, boss. Just need a good night's sleep." But Nancy knew it was more than that. She'd seen the bottles, amphetamines to keep him going, sedatives to bring him down. She'd disposed of a few, hoping it would help, but they always reappeared, like weeds in a garden. That night, she made a decision. She couldn't stay silent anymore, not when Elvis looked like he was fading. She waited until the house was quiet, then slipped a note under his bedroom door. "Elvis, you're stronger than those pills. Please get help. Nancy." The next morning, she regretted it. What right did she have, a maid, to meddle in the king's life? But when she saw Elvis in the dining room, he caught her eye and nodded, a small gesture that felt like a lifeline. "Thanks for the note," he whispered as he passed, his voice soft but sincere. "You're one of the good ones." For a moment, Nancy felt hope, a spark that maybe, just maybe, she'd reached him. That hope was short-lived. Later that day, Priscilla called her to the upstairs parlor, the same room where she'd issued her warning a year ago. Priscilla stood by the window, her dark hair perfect, her eyes cold. "Nancy," she said, her voice like ice, "I found your note. It's inappropriate for staff to involve themselves in Elvis's personal matters." Nancy's stomach dropped. "I was just trying to help, ma'am. He's not well." Priscilla's lips tightened. "That's not your concern. Your job is to clean, not to play confidant. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, ma'am," Nancy mumbled, her face burning. She left the parlor, her heart pounding with shame and anger. She'd only wanted to help, but now she was an outsider again, caught in the crossfire of Graceland's unspoken rules. The staff's whispers grew sharper, their glances colder. Even Lila May, who'd once been her ally, shook her head. "Told you, Nancy. You're playing with fire." Nancy threw herself into her work, scrubbing floors until her hands bled, trying to drown out the guilt. She'd crossed a line, and it had cost her the fragile trust she'd built. But she couldn't unsee Elvis's trembling hands, couldn't forget the letters in the attic. Whatever secret they held, it was tied to the man he was becoming, a man lost in his own legend. Tommy Carter showed up at Graceland a week later, his Chevy idling outside the gates. Nancy met him on her break, the winter wind biting her cheeks. He looked older, his brown eyes shadowed, his mechanic's hands stuffed in his pockets. "Heard you got in trouble," he said, his voice low. "What's going on, Nancy?" She sighed, leaning against the gate. "I tried to help him, Tommy. He's hurtin', and nobody's doing anything." Tommy's jaw clenched. "You're not his savior. You're gonna lose everything trying to fix him, your job, your friends, us." His words stung, but she couldn't argue. She'd chosen Elvis's secret over Tommy's love, over Lila May's trust. "I don't know how to stop," she admitted, her voice breaking. "He needs someone, Tommy." Tommy stepped closer, his breath visible in the cold. "What about what you need? You're throwing yourself away for a man who don't even see you." But Elvis had seen her, his nod that morning, his whispered thanks. It wasn't love, not like Tommy meant, but it was something. Nancy looked away, tears stinging her eyes. "I'm sorry, Tommy. I can't walk away. He nodded, his face hard. Then I can't keep chasing you. He walked back to his car, the engine roaring as he drove off. Nancy stood alone, the cold seeping into her bones, knowing she'd lost something she might never get back. In 2025, Maggie Harper sat in her hotel room, her laptop open to a blurry scan of a 1960s Graceland inventory list. Her mother's words, "Find the box." The truth about him, were a constant drumbeat, but the attic remained out of reach. The museum director had shut her down again, and her visit to Lila May had confirmed the box's existence but offered no way in. Maggie's only lead was a retired Graceland groundskeeper, Joe Thompson, who'd worked there in the 60s. She'd tracked him to a bar outside Memphis, and tonight, she'd meet him. Joe was in his 80s, his face weathered but his memory sharp. Over a beer, he squinted at Maggie's photo of her mother. Nancy Harper. Yeah, I remember her. Quiet, hardworking. Always seemed burdened, like she was carrying something heavy. Maggie leaned forward, her heart racing. She mentioned a box in the attic. Something about Elvis. Did you ever hear anything? Joe frowned, sipping his beer. There was talk back then. Boxes, papers, stuff Elvis didn't want folks seeing. I saw Nancy comin' down from the attic once, lookin' spooked. Never asked why. Wasn't my place. Maggie scribbled notes, her mind racing. The box was real, and her mother had hidden it. But why? She thanked Joe, slipping him a 20, and stepped into the Memphis night, her resolve hardening. The attic was her target, and she'd find a way in, even if it meant sneaking past security. Her phone buzzed, her editor, again. Harper, you're out of time. Story or you're fired. Maggie typed back, I'm close. This is worth it. She wasn't sure if she'd publish the truth. This was about her mother, a woman who'd given everything for Elvis, her friendships, her love, her peace. Maggie thought of Tommy's Chevy driving away, of Nancy's sacrifices, and felt a pang of grief. The box held more than Elvis's secret, it held her mother's heart. The city pulsed around her, the Mississippi River glinting under the stars. Maggie looked toward Graceland, its silhouette a beacon in the dark. The box was up there, locked away with a truth that had shaped her mother's life. She'd find it, no matter the cost, because Nancy Harper deserved to be seen, even if it was too late. The Memphis summer of 1969 was a haze of heat and anticipation, the city buzzing with rumors of Elvis Presley's comeback. At Graceland, the mansion felt like a live wire, charged with the energy of a man reclaiming his throne. Nancy Harper, now 29, moved through her tasks with a heaviness that contrasted with the world's excitement. For years at Graceland had carved lines into her heart, lines drawn by the locked box in the attic, the pills she'd hidden for Elvis, and the friendships she'd lost to her silence. Lila May was a distant ally now, their conversations clipped, and Tommy Carter, the man who'd once carved their initials into an oak tree, was a stranger, his proposal unanswered and his visits rare. Elvis was different this summer. The '68 comeback special had lit a fire in him, his voice stronger, his eyes brighter. Nancy saw him in the music room, strumming his guitar, working on songs for his Las Vegas residency. He'd smile at her sometimes, a nod that carried the weight of their late-night talk years ago, but she kept her distance, wary of Priscilla's sharp eyes and the staff's whispers. The box in the attic, its letters and photos hinting at a woman from Elvis's past, loomed over her, a secret she'd vowed to protect. But it was eating at her, a constant reminder of the line she'd crossed from maid to keeper of Elvis's truth. One August evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Graceland erupted into chaos. Nancy was polishing silver in the dining room when shouts echoed from the upstairs hall. She dropped her cloth, her heart racing, and ran toward the noise. In Elvis's bedroom, she found him on the floor, his face ashen, his breathing shallow. Red, one of the Memphis Mafia, was shaking him, panic in his voice. Boss, wake up. Come on. A pill bottle lay spilled on the carpet, more pills than Nancy had ever seen. She froze, the memory of that night in 1965, Elvis slumped, pills scattered, flooding back. This was worse. Call a doctor, she shouted, kneeling beside him. Red hesitated, his eyes darting to the door. No doctors. Colonel's orders. We handle this. Nancy's blood boiled. He's dying, Red. Get help. Her voice cracked, and Red finally nodded, running for the phone. Nancy stayed with Elvis, her hands trembling as she checked his pulse, weak but there. She gathered the pills, shoving them into her apron, her mind racing. She couldn't let this get out. The world worshipped Elvis, but they'd tear him apart if they knew how far he'd fallen. When the doctor arrived, a discreet one, paid to keep quiet, Elvis was conscious, groggy but alive. The doctor whispered to Red, something about overdose and rest, and Nancy slipped out, her apron heavy with the bottle. She hid it in the attic, next to the locked box, her hands shaking as she buried it under a pile of old stage props. She'd protected him again, but the cost was mounting. She felt like she was drowning in his secrets, each one pulling her further from the girl she'd been. The next morning, Lila May cornered her in the kitchen, her eyes blazing. I saw you last night, Nancy, running from his room. What are you hiding now? Nancy's throat tightened. I was helping, Lila. He needed me. Lila May's voice dropped to a hiss. You're not his wife, not his family. You're a maid. You keep this up, you're gonna lose everything. Her words were a knife, cutting through the fragile hope Nancy had clung to. Lila May walked away, leaving Nancy alone with the weight of her choices. That evening, Tommy Carter showed up at Graceland's gates, his Chevy parked under a magnolia tree. Nancy met him, her heart heavy. He looked worn, his brown eyes shadowed, his mechanic's hands stuffed in his pockets. Heard about last night, he said, his voice low. Word spreadin', Nancy. You were there, weren't you? She nodded, unable to lie to him. I had to help, Tommy. He could have died. Tommy's face hardened. You're killin' yourself for him. You've been different since that box, since you started coverin' for him. I can't watch this anymore. He took a deep breath, his voice breaking. I love you, Nancy, but this is it. Come with me, leave Graceland, start a life with me. Or I'm done. Nancy's chest ached, tears stinging her eyes. She loved Tommy, his steady heart, his dreams of a simple life. But the box, the pills, Elvis's trembling hands, they were chains she couldn't break. I can't, Tommy, she whispered. Not yet. He stared at her, his eyes wet. Then you're choosing him over us. He turned, climbing into his Chevy, the engine roaring as he drove away. Nancy stood frozen, the gates cold against her back, knowing she'd lost the one person who'd always seen her. The box in the attic felt heavier than ever, its secrets a burden she'd carry alone. In 2025, Maggie Harper sat in a Memphis diner, her notebook open to a sketch of Graceland's attic based on Joe Thompson's description. Her mother's words, find the box. The truth about him, were a fire driving her forward, but the obstacles were mounting. The museum director had threatened legal action if she pushed for access, and her historian contact had warned her about the Presley estate's influence. Lila May's confirmation of the box had been a breakthrough, but getting to it seemed impossible. Maggie's latest lead was a former Graceland security guard, now retired, who'd worked there in the 70s. She'd found him through a Memphis history forum, and they'd agreed to meet at the diner. He was a wiry man named Carl, his hands scarred from years of work. Nancy Harper, he said, squinting at her photo. Yeah, I knew her. Quiet, kept to herself. There was talk about her and Elvis, nothing romantic, but she was protective. Always sneakin' around the attic, like she was guardin' something. Maggie's pulse quickened. A box? Did she ever mention a box? Carl frowned, sipping his coffee. Not directly. But I saw her up there once, moving stuff around. Looked spooked. Whatever it was, she didn't want it found. Maggie scribbled notes, her mind racing. The box was real, tied to Elvis, tied to her mother's heart. She thanked Carl, slipping him a 10, and stepped into the Memphis night, her resolve hardening. She'd need to bypass the museum's security, maybe a late-night visit, a bribe, or a favor. The box was her mother's legacy, and she wouldn't stop until she found it. Her phone buzzed, her editor, relentless. "Harper, you're done if you don't deliver." Maggie typed back, "I'm on it. This is bigger than you know." She wasn't sure if she'd publish the truth. This was about Nancy, a woman who'd chosen Elvis over love, over freedom. Maggie thought of Tommy's ultimatum, of her mother's sacrifice, and felt a surge of determination. The box held the key to why, and she'd tear Graceland apart to find it. The city hummed around her, Beale Street's neon lights flickering in the distance. Maggie looked toward Graceland, its silhouette a shadow against the stars. The box was up there, hidden with a truth that had broken her mother's heart. She'd find it, even if it meant breaking every rule. The Memphis winter of 1969 was crisp, the air sharp with the promise of snow and the buzz of Elvis Presley's resurgence. Graceland was alive with a new energy, its halls echoing with the afterglow of the '68 comeback special that had reminded the world why Elvis was the king. Nancy Harper, now 29, felt the shift as she moved through her tasks, polishing the dining room's mahogany table, dusting the gold records that lined the walls. But beneath the excitement, a shadow lingered. The locked box in the attic, with its letters and photos hinting at a hidden chapter of Elvis's life, weighed on her like a stone. She'd protected it for 3 years, along with the secret of his pills, but the cost was steep. Lila May's friendship was a faint echo, and Tommy Carter, the man who'd loved her since childhood, was gone. Elvis was different now, his fire rekindled. Nancy saw it in the music room, where he'd strum his guitar, working on songs for his Las Vegas residency. His voice was stronger, his smile brighter, but she noticed the strain, the way his hands trembled when he thought no one was watching, the pill bottles that still appeared despite her efforts to hide them. The comeback special had been a triumph, but it had taken a toll, pushing him to the edge of exhaustion. Nancy remembered the night of his overdose, the panic in his bedroom, and her choice to shield him. She'd hoped the comeback would save him, but it felt like a temporary spark in a man burning out. One chilly December evening, as Graceland's Christmas lights twinkled, Nancy found herself alone in the study, tidying Elvis's desk. A script for change of habit lay open, its pages marked with his scribbled notes. She traced the handwriting, her heart heavy. She'd seen him at his lowest, and now, at his peak, he was still slipping. The box in the attic, the letters, the woman in the Polaroid, felt like a piece of him she was guarding, but it wasn't enough. She couldn't save him from the pills, the pressure, the world that demanded more than he could give. She pulled a sheet of paper from her apron, her hands trembling. She'd been carrying it for weeks, words she'd written and rewritten in her mind. "Elvis," she wrote, "you're the strongest man I know, but these pills are stealing you. Please, get help. For you, for your family, for the world that loves you. Nancy." She folded it, her heart pounding, and slipped it into a drawer, knowing he'd find it later. It was a small act, a whisper against the storm of his life, but it was all she could do. She couldn't speak to him directly, not after Priscilla's warnings, not with the staff's eyes on her. The letter was her last hope, a plea for the man who'd seen her spark. The next day, Elvis caught her in the hallway, his eyes softer than she'd seen in months. "I read your note, Nancy," he said, his voice low. "Means a lot, you carin' like that. I'm tryin', you know." For a moment, she felt a flicker of hope, a belief that he might fight his demons. But as he walked away, she saw the bulge of a pill bottle in his pocket, and the hope dimmed. She'd done what she could, but the box, the pills, the secrets, they were a weight she'd carry alone. The fallout was swift. Word of her letter spread, twisted by the Graceland grapevine. By lunch, the staff were whispering, Nancy Harper, meddling again, thinking she was more than a maid. Lila May pulled her aside in the kitchen, her face a mask of frustration. "You don't learn, do you?" she said, her voice sharp. "You're gonna get yourself fired, or worse." "I had to try, Lila," Nancy said, her voice breaking. "He's dying out there." Lila May's eyes softened, but only for a moment. "You can't save him, Nancy. And you're losing yourself trying. She walked away, leaving Nancy with a sinking feeling. The staff's whispers grew colder, their glances sharper. Even the Memphis Mafia, usually friendly, kept their distance. Nancy felt like a ghost in the mansion she'd once loved, her loyalty to Elvis a chain that bound her to his downfall. She thought of Tommy, his ultimatum echoing in her mind. He'd walked away, and she hadn't stopped him. The box in the attic felt heavier now, its secrets a burden she couldn't share. She'd chosen Elvis over her own life, and the cost was clearer every day. At night, she'd lie awake in her small apartment, the Memphis skyline a faint glow through her window, wondering if she'd made the right choice. The letters, the woman in the Polaroid, who was she? And why had Elvis trusted Nancy to guard her memory? In 2025, Maggie Harper sat in a Memphis library, poring over microfiche of old newspapers. Her mother's words, "Find the box." The truth about him, were a fire in her chest, but the attic remained out of reach. The museum director had threatened legal action, and her leads, Lila May, Joe Thompson, Carl the security guard, had confirmed the box's existence but offered no way in. Maggie's latest hope was a retired Graceland curator, Ellen Price, who'd catalogued artifacts in the 80s. Maggie had found her through a museum contact and arranged a meeting. Ellen was in her 70s, her hair gray but her memory sharp. They met at a coffee shop, the air thick with the scent of espresso and nostalgia. Maggie showed her the photo of Nancy at Graceland. "My mom mentioned a box in the attic, something about Elvis. Did you ever come across it?" Ellen frowned, stirring her coffee. "There were boxes up there, costumes, records, personal stuff. I saw one once, wooden, locked, with EAP carved on it. Looked old, like it had been there since the 60s. We didn't open it, orders from the estate. But I heard rumors, about a maid who was protective of it. That must have been your mom." Maggie's heart raced. "Where is it now?" Ellen shrugged. "Still up there, I'd guess. The attic's a vault, nobody goes up unless the estate says so. You'd need a miracle to get in." Maggie thanked her, her mind spinning. The box was real, tied to her mother, tied to Elvis. She'd need to bypass security, maybe find a sympathetic staff member. The thought of sneaking into Graceland was daunting, but she was running out of options. Her phone buzzed, her editor, relentless. "Harper, you're done if you don't deliver by next week." Maggie typed back, "I'm close. Trust me." She wasn't sure if she'd publish the truth. This was about her mother, a woman who'd sacrificed everything for Elvis, her friendships, her love, her peace. Maggie thought of Tommy's Chevy driving away, of Nancy's letter to Elvis, and felt a surge of determination. The box held the key to her mother's choices, and she'd find it, even if it meant breaking every rule. The Memphis night was alive with the hum of Beale Street, its music a heartbeat that echoed her own. Maggie looked toward Graceland, its silhouette a shadow against the stars. The box was up there, hidden with a truth that had shaped her mother's life. She'd find it, no matter the cost, because Nancy Harper deserved to be seen, even if it was too late. The Memphis spring of 1973 was soft, with dogwoods blooming and the Mississippi River glinting under a gentle sun. At Graceland, though, the air was heavy, the mansion a cocoon of secrets and fading glory. Nancy Harper, now 33, moved through her tasks with a quiet resolve, her hands steady as she dusted the jungle room's teak statues or folded linen scented with lavender. 7 years at Graceland had made her a fixture, but the weight of the locked box in the attic, its letters and photos hinting at a woman from Elvis's past, had carved a hollow in her heart. She'd lost Tommy Carter, her childhood love, to her loyalty to Elvis, and her friendship with Lila May was a shadow of what it had been. The secret she carried was a chain, binding her to a man who was slipping further from the king the world knew. Elvis was unraveling. His Las Vegas residencies and endless tours had drained him, his face gaunt, his eyes hidden behind sunglasses. Nancy saw the pill bottles everywhere now, on nightstands, in bathroom drawers, and her efforts to hide them felt futile. She'd written him that letter years ago, urging him to seek help, but it hadn't changed him. The box in the attic, with its letters signed, "My Dearest," and a Polaroid of a woman who wasn't Priscilla, was a secret she'd guarded since 1966. But in 1973, it came crashing into the light. One April evening, as thunder rumbled over Memphis, Nancy was cleaning the upstairs hallway when she heard raised voices from Elvis's bedroom. She paused, her heart pounding, knowing she should walk away. But the door was ajar, and Priscilla's voice cut through the air. "Who is she, Elvis? These letters, I found them in your desk. Who's my dearest?" Nancy's blood ran cold. She peeked through the crack, seeing Elvis slumped in a chair, his face pale. "It's not what you think, Scylla," he said, his voice weary. "It was years ago, before you. I didn't know." "Didn't know what?" Priscilla's voice was sharp, her hands clutching a familiar envelope, one Nancy had seen in the attic box. "That you had a child. A daughter, Elvis. And you kept it from me?" Nancy's knees buckled. A child. The woman in the letters, the Polaroid, she'd been pregnant. Nancy's mind flashed to 1964, a memory she'd buried, a young woman, frantic, arriving at Graceland late one night, begging for Elvis. Nancy had been on duty, had escorted her to a guest room, had promised to keep quiet when Elvis asked her to. She'd helped the woman leave Memphis, her pregnancy a secret, and when the box appeared in the attic, Nancy had known it was tied to her. She'd hidden it to protect Elvis, to shield his family, but now the truth was out, and it was a bomb. "I didn't know for sure," Elvis said, his voice breaking. "She never told me, not till later. I wanted to do right, but the colonel said it'd ruin me. I sent money, Scylla, I swear." Priscilla's eyes were wet, her voice trembling. "And you let a maid, Nancy, cover for you? She knew, didn't she?" Nancy backed away, her heart racing. She fled to the attic, her flashlight shaking as she unearthed the box from its hiding place. She opened it, the letters spilling out, each one a piece of a story she'd only glimpsed. The woman, Anna, had loved Elvis, had borne his child, a daughter, in secret. Nancy had helped her, had kept her promise, but now it was unraveling, and she was caught in the fallout. She hid the box again, deeper, her hands trembling. She couldn't let Priscilla find it, couldn't let the world know. But the secret was no longer hers alone, and the weight of it was crushing her. The next day, Priscilla called Nancy to the parlor, her face a mask of controlled fury. "You knew," she said, her voice low. "About the child. You helped him hide it." Nancy's throat tightened. "I was trying to protect him, ma'am. And you?" "I didn't know about the child till later." Priscilla's eyes narrowed. "You're a maid, Nancy. Your loyalty is to this house, not to his secrets. Leave. Now." Nancy's world tilted. She'd given everything, Tommy, Lila May, her own peace, for Elvis, and now she was cast out. She left Graceland that day, her apron folded, her heart broken. The box stayed hidden, a silent promise she'd keep until her death. In 2025, Maggie Harper stood in Graceland's parking lot, her heart pounding as she stared at the mansion's white columns. Her mother's words, find the box. The truth about him had led her here, through dead ends and resistance. The museum director had barred her from the attic, but Maggie had found a way in. A night janitor, sympathetic to her story, had agreed to let her slip in after hours for a price. Tonight was her chance. Under cover of darkness, Maggie followed the janitor through a service entrance, her flashlight casting shadows on Graceland's walls. The attic was a labyrinth of crates and costumes, the air thick with dust and memory. She searched for hours, her hands sifting through relics of Elvis's life, sequin jumpsuits, old records, until her fingers brushed a wooden box, its surface carved with EAP. Her breath caught as she pulled it free, the lock rusted but intact. With trembling hands, she pried it open, revealing a stack of letters and Polaroids. The top letter, in a woman's handwriting, read, "My dearest E, our daughter is safe, but I can't keep this up." A photo showed a young woman, Anna, holding a baby, Elvis beside her, his face soft with a love Maggie had never seen in his public image. Her mother's note was tucked inside, "I kept your secret, Elvis. For her. For you. Nancy." Maggie's knees buckled. A daughter. Elvis had a child, hidden from the world, and her mother had protected her. The truth shook Maggie's view of Elvis, not a scandal, but a human story of love and sacrifice. Her mother had been part of it, a guardian of a secret that could have shattered his legacy. She sat in the attic, tears streaming down her face, the weight of her mother's choices crashing over her. Nancy had lost everything, Tommy, her job, her peace, to protect a child who'd never know her name. Maggie clutched the box, knowing she held a truth that could change how the world saw Elvis Presley. Back at her hotel, Maggie's phone buzzed, her editor, relentless. "Harper, you're out if you don't deliver." She didn't reply. This wasn't about a story. It was about her mother, a woman who'd carried a secret heavy enough to break her. Maggie thought of the letters, of Anna and her daughter, and felt a surge of responsibility. She'd find the child, now an adult, and give her the truth. But first, she needed to decide what to do with the box. The Memphis night was quiet, the city's heartbeat a distant hum. Maggie looked toward Graceland, its silhouette a reminder of her mother's sacrifice. The box was in her hands now, its truth a legacy of love and loss. She'd carry it forward, for Nancy, for Elvis, for the daughter who deserved to know. The Memphis morning of May 2025 was warm, the air thick with the scent of magnolias and the hum of a city waking up. Maggie Harper sat in her hotel room, the wooden box from Graceland's attic open on her desk, its contents. Letters, Polaroids, and her mother's note, spread before her like a map to a hidden past. The truth had shaken her. Elvis Presley had fathered a daughter, Sarah, with a woman named Anna, and Nancy Harper, her mother, had protected their secret, sacrificing her job, her love, and her peace. Maggie's fingers traced the photo of Anna and Elvis, their faces soft with a love the world never saw. The question now was what to do with it: publish the story and risk sensationalizing her mother's sacrifice, or keep it quiet, honoring Nancy's silence. Maggie's laptop glowed with a blank document, her editor's deadline looming. She'd snuck into Graceland's attic the night before, bribing a janitor to get the box, and now the weight of its truth pressed on her. As a journalist for the Memphis Star, she knew the story could redefine Elvis's legacy, not as a scandal, but as a human story of love and loss. But it wasn't just Elvis's story. It was her mother's, a maid who'd given everything to protect a child she'd never met. Maggie's heart ached, torn between her duty to the truth and her loyalty to Nancy's memory. She'd spent the morning tracking down Sarah, the daughter named in Anna's letters. Using her journalist contacts, Maggie found a woman named Sarah Thompson, now 58, living in Nashville. The letters mentioned Anna moving there after leaving Memphis, and a private investigator had confirmed Sarah's identity through old records. Maggie had called her, her voice trembling as she explained the box, the secret, her mother's role. Sarah had agreed to meet, and now Maggie was driving to Nashville, the box in her passenger seat, her mind a storm of doubt and determination. In 1977, Nancy Harper's final days at Graceland were a blur of regret and quiet resolve. She'd returned to the mansion after her firing in 1973, rehired by Elvis's father, Vernon, who'd always liked her work. But Graceland was a ghost of its former self. Elvis was rarely home, his tours and Las Vegas residencies consuming him, and when he was a shadow, gaunt, unsteady, his voice still powerful but his eyes empty. Nancy, now 37, moved through her tasks like a machine, her heart heavy with the secret she'd kept for over a decade. The box remained in the attic, untouched since she'd hidden it deeper after Priscilla's confrontation. Nancy had wanted to destroy it, to burn the letters and photos, but she couldn't. They were proof of a love Elvis had lost, a daughter he'd never known. She'd helped Anna leave Memphis, had promised to keep her secret, and now it was a vow that defined her life. She'd lost Tommy Carter, who'd married another woman and moved away. Lila May had left Graceland, their friendship broken by Nancy's silence. The mansion was her world now, its walls both a refuge and a prison. One August morning, as Memphis sweltered, Nancy heard the news: Elvis was dead. She was polishing the dining room table when Red, one of the Memphis Mafia, stumbled in, his face ashen. "He's gone, Nancy. Found him in his bathroom." Heart gave out. Nancy's knees buckled, and she sank into a chair, her hands trembling. She'd known he was fading, had seen the pills, the exhaustion, but the finality hit like a freight train. She'd tried to save him, with her letter, her silence, but it hadn't been enough. That night, alone in her apartment, Nancy wept for the man who'd seen her spark, for the daughter he'd never met, for the life she'd given up. She thought of the box, still hidden in the attic, and vowed to keep it safe, even if it meant carrying its weight to her grave. Elvis was gone, but his secret was hers to protect, a final act of loyalty to the king who'd changed her life. In 2025, Maggie sat across from Sarah Thompson in a Nashville coffee shop, the box on the table between them. Sarah was a striking woman, her dark hair streaked with gray, her eyes a haunting echo of Elvis's. Maggie had explained everything: Nancy's role, the letters, the secret of her birth. Sarah listened, her hands steady but her face pale, as Maggie slid the Polaroid across the table, Anna and Elvis, with baby Sarah in Anna's arms. "My mother told me my father was a musician," Sarah said, her voice soft. "She never said his name. I thought it was because he was a nobody, not Elvis Presley." She touched the photo, her fingers trembling. "Why didn't she tell me?" Maggie swallowed, her throat tight. "She wanted to protect you. So did my mom. Nancy helped your mother leave Memphis, kept the secret to shield you both. It cost her everything, her job, her love, her friends." Sarah's eyes met Maggie's, wet with tears. "Your mother, she didn't even know me. Why would she do that?" Maggie thought of Nancy's note in the box: "I kept your secret, Elvis. For her. For you." She loved him, Maggie said. Not romantically, but deeply. She saw the man behind the myth, and she believed in protecting his heart. "That meant protecting you." Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes. "What do I do with this? The world thinks they know Elvis, but this, it changes everything." Maggie leaned forward, her voice steady. "That's what I'm wrestling with. I'm a journalist. I could publish this, show the world Elvis's humanity, his love, his mistakes. But it's your story too. And my mom's. I don't want to betray her." Sarah looked at the box, then back at Maggie. "Let me think about it. I need to know my mother's side, to understand why she kept this from me. Can you give me time?" Maggie nodded, her heart heavy but hopeful. For the first time, she felt like she was honoring her mother's sacrifice, not exploiting it. She handed Sarah a copy of the letters, keeping the originals. "Take all the time you need. I'll wait." Back in Memphis, Maggie sat in her hotel room, the box locked in her suitcase. Her editor's latest message was a threat: "No story by tomorrow, you're done." Maggie didn't reply. This wasn't about a headline, it was about her mother, a woman who'd carried a secret heavy enough to break her. Maggie thought of Nancy's final days at Graceland, her regret for a man she couldn't save, and felt a surge of purpose. She'd protect Sarah's choice, just as Nancy had protected her. She opened her laptop, starting a new document, not for publication, but for herself. My mother, Nancy Harper, was more than a maid. She was a guardian of a truth the world never knew, a woman who loved fiercely and paid the price. The words flowed, a tribute to Nancy's quiet strength. Maggie wasn't sure what came next, but meeting Sarah had given her hope, a chance to heal the wounds her mother had carried. The Memphis night was quiet, the city's lights a soft glow through her window. Maggie looked toward Graceland, its silhouette a reminder of her mother's sacrifice. The box was safe, its truth shared with the one person who deserved it. For now, that was enough. The Memphis dusk of May 2025 painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, the Mississippi River catching the last light like a ribbon of fire. Maggie Harper stood outside her childhood home, a modest bungalow on the outskirts of the city, the wooden box from Graceland's attic tucked under her arm. The past week had been a whirlwind, finding the box, meeting Sarah Thompson, Elvis Presley's hidden daughter, and wrestling with whether to publish a truth that could reshape a legend's legacy. Her mother, Nancy Harper, had carried that secret for decades, sacrificing her job, her love, and her peace to protect a child she'd never met. Now, it was Maggie's burden, and the weight of it was both a wound and a gift. Inside the bungalow, Maggie's aunt, Clara, was waiting. Clara, Nancy's younger sister, had been a constant in Maggie's life, a no-nonsense woman who'd raised her after Nancy's health began to fail. Maggie had called her yesterday, explaining the box, the letters, Sarah, everything. Clara had listened in silence, then said, "Come home, Maggie. We need to talk." Now, as Maggie stepped through the door, the smell of Clara's cornbread and the creak of the old floorboards grounded her, a reminder of the family Nancy had fought to protect. Clara sat at the kitchen table, her gray hair pulled into a bun, her eyes sharp but kind. "Sit," she said, pushing a plate of cornbread toward Maggie. "You look like you haven't slept in a week." Maggie managed a weak smile, setting the box on the table. "Feels like it. It's bigger than I expected, Aunt Clara. Mom kept this secret her whole life, and I don't know what to do with it." Clara's gaze flicked to the box, then back to Maggie. "Your mama was the strongest woman I knew. She loved you fierce, but she carried things she never should have. Tell me what you found." Maggie opened the box, pulling out the letters and the Polaroid of Anna, Elvis, and baby Sarah. She recounted the story, Nancy's role in helping Anna leave Memphis, hiding the box, losing Tommy Carter, getting fired by Priscilla. Clara listened, her hands folded, her face unreadable. When Maggie finished, Clara sighed, a sound heavy with years of unspoken grief. "She never told me about the child," Clara said, her voice soft. "But I knew she was carrying something. After she left Graceland, she wasn't the same. She'd sit on the porch, staring at the stars, like she was waiting for forgiveness." Maggie's throat tightened. "Did she ever talk about why she kept it secret?" Clara nodded. "Once, after a few glasses of wine. Said she did it for love, not for Elvis, but for the idea of him. The man she saw when nobody else did. She thought protectin' his family was protectin' that." Maggie looked at the Polaroid, her fingers tracing Sarah's tiny face. "I met her, Aunt Clara. Sarah. She's got his eyes. She doesn't know what to do with this either." Clara reached across the table, squeezing Maggie's hand. "You're your mother's daughter, Maggie. You'll find a way to do right by her. But don't forget your own family. We're still here." The words hit Maggie like a wave, a reminder of the love she'd nearly lost in her chase for the truth. She'd been so focused on Nancy's sacrifice, on Elvis's legacy, that she'd pushed Clara away. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to shut you out." Clara's smile was warm. "You're here now. That's what matters." In the 1980s, Nancy Harper rebuilt her life with a quiet strength that belied her scars. After Elvis's death in 1977, she'd left Graceland for good, taking a job cleaning offices in downtown Memphis. The box remained in the attic, a secret she'd vowed to keep, but its weight followed her. She lived in a small apartment, raising Maggie alone, pouring her love into her daughter's dreams. She never spoke of Elvis, of Tommy, of the daughter she'd helped protect. But at night, when Maggie was asleep, Nancy would sit by the window, a glass of tea in her hand, her eyes distant. She found solace in small things, teaching Maggie to bake cornbread, reading her library books, saving every penny for her college fund. Clara, her sister, was her rock, dropping by with groceries or a sharp-witted joke to lift her spirits. "You're tougher than you look, Nan," Clara would say, and Nancy would smile, but the truth was heavier. She'd loved Elvis, not romantically, but deeply, as a man who'd shown her kindness in a world that rarely did. Protecting his secret had been her way of repaying that, even if it meant losing Tommy, Lila May, and a piece of herself. One evening in 1985, as Memphis glowed under a summer moon, Nancy sat with Clara on the bungalow's porch. Maggie, then 15, was inside doing homework. "You ever think about telling her?" Clara asked, nodding toward the house. "About Graceland, what you did?" Nancy shook her head, her voice soft. "It's done, Clara. No need to stir up old ghosts. She's got a future. That's what matters." Clara frowned but didn't push. Nancy sipped her tea, her eyes on the stars, knowing the box was still out there, a truth she'd carry to her grave. She'd made her choice, and though it had broken her, it had given Maggie a life free of its shadow. In 2025, Maggie drove to Graceland the next morning, the box in her trunk. She'd decided to share the truth, but not as a sensational headline. She'd write a story for the Memphis Star, not about scandal, but about humanity, Elvis's love for Anna, Nancy's sacrifice, Sarah's existence as a testament to their choices. She'd cleared it with Sarah, who'd agreed to a private acknowledgement, no names, just a nod to a daughter who'd lived in the shadows. Maggie would protect Sarah's privacy, just as Nancy had. At Graceland, she met with the museum director, a stern woman named Linda who'd stonewalled her for weeks. Maggie laid out her plan, a story that honored Elvis's legacy, not tarnished it, and a promise to keep the box's contents private. "My mother was part of this place," Maggie said, her voice steady. "She gave everything to protect Elvis's heart. Let me tell her story, and his, the right way." Linda's eyes softened, a flicker of respect. "We'll review it," she said. "No promises, but I'll talk to the estate." Maggie left, her heart lighter. She'd faced the Presley family's legacy, not as an enemy, but as a daughter honoring her mother. Back at the bungalow, she cooked dinner with Clara, laughing over old stories of Nancy's stubborn streak. For the first time in weeks, Maggie felt whole, connected to the family her mother had fought for. Her phone buzzed, her editor, impatient. "Story by tomorrow, Harper, or you're out." Maggie smiled, typing back, "It's coming. You'll see." This wasn't just a story, it was a bridge between past and present, a way to heal the wounds her mother had carried. The Memphis night was warm, the stars bright above the bungalow. Maggie stepped onto the porch, breathing in the scent of honeysuckle. She thought of Nancy's quiet strength, her love that had endured through loss. The box was safe, its truth shared with care. Maggie was ready to carry her mother's legacy forward, not as a secret, but as a story of love that deserved to be told. The Memphis summer of 2025 was golden, the air alive with the hum of cicadas and the scent of blooming jasmine. Maggie Harper sat in her office at the Memphis Star, her laptop open to the final draft of her story, The Heart of the King, A Maid's Secret and Elvis Presley's Hidden Love. It wasn't the sensational exposé her editor had wanted, but a tender narrative about Elvis's humanity, his love for Anna, their daughter Sarah, and Nancy Harper's sacrifice to protect them. Maggie had worked with Sarah to ensure her privacy, omitting her name and focusing on the emotional truth. A maid's loyalty, a star's vulnerability, a child's existence as a testament to love. The box from Graceland's attic, with its letters and Polaroids, sat locked in her safe, its secrets shared only with those who needed to know. Publishing the story was a risk. The Presley estate had approved it reluctantly, after Maggie's meeting with the museum director, Linda, who'd seen the respect in her approach. But the world was hungry for Elvis, and Maggie knew the story could spark controversy. Still, it was her mother's story too, a woman who'd given everything to shield a man she believed in. Maggie's fingers hovered over the "submit" button, her heart pounding. This was for Nancy, for Sarah, for the truth that deserved to be told softly. She clicked send, her breath catching. The story would hit the stands tomorrow, and with it, a piece of her mother's heart would finally be seen. Maggie leaned back, her eyes drifting to a photo on her desk. Nancy, young and radiant, standing outside Graceland's gates. "I did it, Mom," she whispered. "For you." In the 1990s, Nancy Harper's life was a quiet tapestry of love and reflection. She was in her 50s, her hands worn from years of work, her heart softened by raising Maggie. After leaving Graceland for good in 1977, she'd built a modest life, cleaning offices, saving for Maggie's college, finding joy in small moments. The box in the attic remained her secret, a vow she'd kept through Elvis's death and the years that followed. She never spoke of it, not even to Clara, her sister, who'd seen the weight in her eyes. Maggie was her light. At 15, she was fierce and curious, always scribbling in notebooks, dreaming of being a journalist. Nancy would watch her, a smile tugging at her lips, knowing she'd given her daughter the freedom she'd never had. But at night, when Maggie slept, Nancy would sit on the bungalow's porch, a glass of sweet tea in her hand, her thoughts drifting to Graceland. She'd think of Elvis's crooked smile, Anna's desperate eyes, the daughter she'd helped protect. She'd lost Tommy Carter, Lila May, her place in the world, but she'd gained Maggie, and that was enough. One summer evening in 1995, as fireflies danced in the dusk, Nancy and Maggie sat on the porch, sharing a plate of cornbread. Maggie, now 25 and interning at a local paper, turned to her. "Mom, you ever miss Graceland? Workin' for Elvis?" Nancy's heart skipped, but she kept her voice steady. "It was a different time, baby. I saw a lot, learned a lot. But this," she gestured to the bungalow, to Maggie. "This is what matters." Maggie frowned, sensing the unspoken. "You never talk about it. Was it hard?" Nancy looked at the stars, her eyes distant. "Love makes you do crazy things, Maggie. Things you die to protect. I don't regret it, but it wasn't easy." Maggie didn't push, but her questions lingered in Nancy's mind. She thought of the box, still hidden in Graceland's attic, and wondered if she'd ever tell Maggie the truth. Not yet, she decided. Her daughter deserved a life unburdened by old secrets. In 2025, the morning after submitting her story, Maggie drove to Graceland, her heart full. The story had gone live online at midnight, and her phone was buzzing with notifications, colleagues, readers, even Sarah, who texted, "Thank you for doing this right." Maggie had kept her editor at bay, promising the print edition would sell, but this visit wasn't about work. It was about closure, about honoring the woman who'd shaped her. The museum director, Linda, met her at the gates, her face softer than before. "Your story's causing a stir," she said, leading Maggie inside. "But it's respectful. The estate appreciates that." Maggie nodded, clutching a small photo of Nancy. "Can I see the attic again? Just for a moment?" Linda hesitated, then agreed, escorting her to the dusty labyrinth where Maggie had found the box. The attic was unchanged, crates, costumes, the faint smell of mildew. Maggie stood where she pried open the box, her mother's note echoing in her mind, "I kept your secret, Elvis. For her. For you." She placed the photo on a crate, a quiet offering. "You're not invisible anymore, Mom," she whispered. Maggie was her light. At 15, she was fierce and curious, always scribbling in notebooks, dreaming of being a journalist. Nancy would watch her, a smile tugging at her lips, knowing she'd given her daughter the freedom she'd never had. But at night, when Maggie slept, Nancy would sit on the bungalow's porch, a glass of sweet tea in her hand, her thoughts drifting to Graceland. She'd think of Elvis's crooked smile, Anna's desperate eyes, the daughter she'd helped protect. She'd lost Tommy Carter, Lila May, her place in the world, but she'd gained Maggie, and that was enough. One summer evening in 1995, as fireflies danced in the dusk, Nancy and Maggie sat on the porch, sharing a plate of cornbread. Maggie, now 25 and interning at a local paper, turned to her. "Mom, you ever miss Graceland? Workin' for Elvis?" Nancy's heart skipped, but she kept her voice steady. "It was a different time, baby. I saw a lot, learned a lot. But this," she gestured to the bungalow, to Maggie. "This is what matters." Maggie frowned, sensing the unspoken. "You never talk about it. Was it hard?" Nancy looked at the stars, her eyes distant. "Love makes you do crazy things, Maggie. Things you'd die to protect. I don't regret it, but it wasn't easy." Maggie didn't push, but her questions lingered in Nancy's mind. She thought of the box, still hidden in Graceland's attic, and wondered if she'd ever tell Maggie the truth. Not yet, she decided. Her daughter deserved a life unburdened by old secrets. In 2025, the morning after submitting her story, Maggie drove to Graceland, her heart full. The story had gone live online at midnight, and her phone was buzzing with notifications, colleagues, readers, even Sarah, who texted, "Thank you for doing this right." Maggie had kept her editor at bay, promising the print edition would sell, but this visit wasn't about work. It was about closure, about honoring the woman who'd shaped her. The museum director, Linda, met her at the gates, her face softer than before. "Your story's causing a stir," she said, leading Maggie inside. "But it's respectful. The estate appreciates that." Maggie nodded, clutching a small photo of Nancy. "Can I see the attic again? Just for a moment?" Linda hesitated, then agreed, escorting her to the dusty labyrinth where Maggie had found the box. The attic was unchanged, crates, costumes, the faint smell of mildew. Maggie stood where she pried open the box, her mother's note echoing in her mind, "I kept your secret, Elvis. For her. For you." She placed the photo on a crate, a quiet offering. "You're not invisible anymore, Mom," she whispered. The story's impact had been profound. Readers sent letters to the Memphis Star, sharing how the tale of Nancy's loyalty and Elvis's vulnerability had touched them. The Presley estate had added a permanent exhibit to Graceland, honoring the staff who'd kept the mansion alive, with Nancy's name at its heart. Sarah, now a quiet part of Maggie's life, had chosen to stay out of the spotlight but kept in touch, grateful for the truth about her father. Maggie's career was secure, her editor, once skeptical, now called her the heart of the newsroom, but the real victory was personal. She'd reconnected with her family, her Aunt Clara, and her mother's memory, finding a purpose that went beyond headlines. Today, Maggie was meeting Clara for a picnic by the river, a chance to celebrate the life they'd built on Nancy's foundation. She wore her mother's old silver locket, a keepsake Clara had given her, and felt Nancy's presence in the breeze, the city, the heartbeat of Memphis. The box was safe in her apartment, its letters and Polaroids a private testament to her mother's courage. Maggie's notebook held the start of a new project, not a story, but a memoir, a tribute to Nancy Harper, the woman who'd seen the king's heart and paid the price. In the early 2000s, Nancy Harper's final years were a quiet testament to her resilience. She was in her 60s, her health fading from years of hard work, but her spirit was unbroken. She lived in the same bungalow on Memphis's outskirts, raising Maggie with a love that filled the gaps left by loss. The box in Graceland's attic remained her secret, a vow she'd kept since 1966 when she'd helped Anna, Elvis's lover, leave Memphis with their unborn daughter, Sarah. Nancy had lost Tommy Carter, Lila May, her place at Graceland, but she'd gained Maggie, and that was her redemption. Maggie, now in her 20s and a budding journalist, was Nancy's pride. They'd sit on the bungalow's porch, sharing sweet tea and stories. Maggie's questions about Graceland always met with a gentle deflection. "It was a different time, baby," Nancy would say, her eyes distant. "I did what I had to do." But in 2005, as her health began to decline, Nancy started to open up, sharing snippets of her life at Graceland, not the box, not Sarah, but the man she'd known. "Elvis was kind," she told Maggie one evening, her voice soft. "He saw me when nobody else did. That's worth something." Clara, Nancy's sister, was a constant presence, bringing casseroles and sharp-witted humor. "You're a stubborn old mule, Nan," Clara would tease, but her eyes held love. Nancy would smile, knowing she'd carried a secret heavier than most, but she'd done it for Maggie's future, for Sarah's safety, for the memory of a man who'd changed the world. In her final months in 2025, Nancy lay in a hospital bed, her hands frail but her eyes still bright. Maggie sat beside her, holding her hand, unaware of the box but sensing her mother's unspoken burden. "I'm proud of you, Maggie," Nancy whispered, her voice a wisp. "Find the truth, always. But don't let it break you." Those words, and her mention of the box in the attic, were Nancy's last gift, a call to uncover a legacy she'd guarded for decades. In 2025, Maggie spread a blanket by the river, Clara arriving with a basket of cornbread and fried chicken. They laughed, the sound mingling with the water's gentle lap, as Clara shared stories of Nancy's youth, her stubborn streak, her love for the blues, her dreams of a bigger life. Maggie felt her mother's presence in every word, a warmth that healed the grief of her loss. "She'd be proud of you," Clara said, her eyes soft. "You told her story right." Maggie nodded, her throat tight. "I just wish she could have seen it. The exhibit, the story, Sarah." Clara squeezed her hand. "She sees it, Maggie. She's with you." They ate, the river a quiet witness to their bond. Maggie thought of Sarah, who'd sent a letter last week, thanking her for giving her a piece of her father. She thought of Graceland, its new exhibit a nod to Nancy's quiet heroism. And she thought of her memoir, the pages filling with her mother's life, not just the secret, but the love that had driven her. Maggie had found her purpose, to tell stories that mattered, that honored the invisible, like her mother had been. That evening, Maggie visited Graceland one last time. The museum director, Linda, greeted her warmly, leading her to the staff exhibit. Nancy's name gleamed on the plaque, alongside a photo of her outside the gates, her smile radiant. Maggie touched the plaque, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Mom," she whispered. "For everything." Outside, the Memphis night was alive, Beale Street's music drifting on the breeze. Maggie walked to her car, her notebook in hand, ready to write the next chapter, not just of her memoir, but of her life. She'd faced the Presley legacy, reconnected with her family, and carried her mother's story to the world. The box's truth had set her free, giving her a new beginning rooted in love. The city glowed under the stars, its heartbeat a song of resilience and hope. Maggie drove home, the locket warm against her chest, her mother's spirit guiding her. Nancy Harper's legacy wasn't just a secret, it was a life of love, sacrifice, and quiet strength, now etched into Memphis's soul. Maggie would carry it forward, telling stories that lit up the shadows, just as her mother had done in the heart of Graceland. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?